The ships seemed invincible, but the elements and human error destroyed people's dreams. Immerse yourself in 5 stories about those moments when the sea decided who would survive. On December 20th, 1987, one of the most terrible maritime tragedies in human history occurred off the coast of the Philippines, a tragedy that is spoken of quietly, but the memory of which remains in the minds of those who have heard the stories of the survivors. The passenger ferry Dona Paz, overcrowded, overloaded, and effectively operating beyond all reasonable safety regulations, set sail and found itself in the night fog when it collided with the oil tanker Vector. The impact and the ensuing fuel spill caused an instant fire that engulfed the decks and holds of both vessels, turning the sea into a strip of fire. Many passengers and crew members were trapped or disoriented in the thick smoke and flames, and the lack of serviceable life-saving equipment and the overloading of the ship made the chances of rescue minimal. The night and darkness concealed the scale of the disaster until the first flashes of burning fuel lit up the surface of the water, and only then did it become clear that something unimaginable was happening. Decks were floating in flames, people were throwing themselves into the sea, and all around were debris and screams. There were over 4,000 people on board the ferry, but there were clearly not enough lifeboats and effective means of evacuation. Rescuers and local fishermen took the risk of pulling the few survivors out of the water, but many bodies were unrecognizable due to burns and injuries, and the waves and darkness carried away the traces of those who had died in the first hours. According to official data, more than 4,300 people died and only 26 survived, figures that reflect the scale of the tragedy, which is difficult to comprehend. The relatives of the victims faced prolonged pain and uncertainty. Identification was often impossible, and bureaucratic procedures and commercial interests hindered swift and transparent investigations. The causes of the tragedy were discussed at length. Navigation errors, disregard for safety regulations, inadequate technical control, and commercial pressure on shipowners seeking to cut costs were cited. The nighttime evacuation descended into chaos, with many passengers unable to leave the interior of the ship, which was locked or blocked, and rescue services working in extremely difficult conditions. Years later, investigations revealed systemic violations and indicated that the tragedy was the result of a chain of errors and negligence, rather than a single accident. Legal proceedings and reputational scandals were frequently reported in the press, but for many families, justice remained elusive. Compensation and acknowledgement of responsibility were slow in coming, if they came at all. The Dona Paz is compared to other famous shipwrecks, but this tragedy stands out for its brutal simplicity. A mass of people, an evening flight, fuel and fire, and the system's inability to protect the most vulnerable. For Filipino communities, this event has become a symbol of loss and a call for change. The memory of the victims is preserved in memorial gatherings, eyewitness accounts, and individual publications, although for the global community, this story often remains overshadowed by more prominent names. Experts have discussed many issues: the need to tighten passenger registration controls, ensure transparent accounting of the number of people on board, mandatory inspections of life-saving equipment, and regular maintenance of vessels, as well as training crews to act in extreme situations. However, reforms are slow, and critics note that changes are often merely declarative, while commercial interests and bureaucratic obstacles prevent the full implementation of safety measures. Many journalistic investigations have highlighted the economic and administrative causes of the disaster, showing how economic pressure and weak controls create conditions for tragedies of this kind. The stories of the survivors are full of pain and contradictions. The few who managed to survive recalled the smell of burning fuel, the sound of the fuselage cracking, and the heat that made even the water seem colder. Many felt guilty for having survived and are still trying to come to terms with their memories. The loss was particularly hard on families with children and elderly people, whose names remain forever on the lists of those missing. The resonance of the incident led to discussions about international standards and the need for strict supervision. But even years later, there are still unanswered questions and controversial issues that give rise to various versions and theories. The memory of the Dona Paz lives on in local memorials, family archives, and rare books on maritime disasters, and it is important not to let this event sink into oblivion, for at its core lies a lesson about the price of human negligence and how easily thousands of lives can be lost for the sake of short-term gain. This tragedy left a deep scar on the national memory of the Philippines and on the minds of those who study maritime safety. As the years passed and new technologies and regulations emerged, past mistakes that needed to be corrected came to light. But lessons are poorly learned if they are not followed by real change and strict accountability. The relatives of the victims sought justice, went to court, and gathered facts and evidence to try to prevent a repeat. Many initiatives to tighten shipping controls and improve crew training standards were supported by experts, but their implementation was slow, and at times the decisions remained formal. Public organizations and activists demanded transparency in investigations and fair compensation for families affected by human negligence. Investigative journalists published articles exposing systemic violations and commercial interests that often hindered open proceedings, and so the memory of the Don Paz remains a call for accountability and change. MV Wilhelm Gustloff is a name forever associated with one of the darkest chapters in maritime history. At the end of the war, as the front lines shifted and millions of people fled their homes, the ship, originally built as a passenger liner, was converted to evacuate military personnel and refugees. Then, on the frosty days of January 1945, people from all walks of life gathered on board. Mothers with children, elderly people, young soldiers, doctors, and service personnel. Hope and despair coexisted. Some tried to remember the little things in everyday life, some silently held photographs in their hands, and some tried to calm those who were crying. Many believed that the sea would be their salvation, that the ship would take them to a safe place, but fate had other plans. A Soviet submarine, Es-13, commanded by a captain whose determination and weapons turned the voyage into a tragedy, joined the nighttime operation in the Baltic Sea. Torpedoes found their target in the darkness, and explosions shattered the silence and fragile confidence of those being rescued. The ship, overloaded with people and belongings, began to sink quickly. The icy decks became dangerous traps, the pumps could not cope, and the cold water pushed back the last attempts to organize an evacuation. The screams, the sailors' commands, the noise of breaking structures and the crackling of ice mingled into one huge, silent sea of sounds. Many rushed to the lifeboats, but there were not enough of them. Many did not make it. Many lost their strength and consciousness. Many plunged into the icy water and could not get out. Estimates of the number of people on board vary in different sources, but most researchers agree that there were more than 9,000, and less than 1,000 survived. This makes it the deadliest shipwreck in the history of human civilization in terms of the number of deaths per vessel. The victims were not just statistics. Behind each lost life was a story. Studies, love, hopes, unlived days. Many women lost their children forever. Many elderly people lost their last refuge, and many soldiers never saw their families again. After the ship sank, large-scale search and rescue operations began, involving ships and people trying to gather those who remained on the surface. But the cold and storms, debris and loneliness in the icy waves made any hope of mass rescue illusory. Subsequently, the events became the subject of controversy and political interpretation. Some saw it as an act of military necessity, others as a tragedy that highlighted the human cost of conflict and the price of evacuation in conditions of disorder. The memory of those who perished lives on in museums and monuments, in books and research, and in the memories of the few who were lucky enough to survive. The personal testimonies of the survivors are filled with images of cold, darkness, grief, and loss. They tell of the unprecedented crowding on the decks, of the loss of bearings, of how people clung to debris and to each other, trying to prolong their own existence against the will of circumstances. Historians continue to study documents, preserving memory and meticulously counting facts, but we cannot limit ourselves to dry figures and dates. It is important to remember the human destinies and the scale of pain that this disaster brought. Each subsequent generation must know about the tragedy of the MV Wilhelm Gustloff as a reminder that war cripples not only armies, but also ordinary people, women, children, and the elderly, that evacuation in panic can become a deadly trap, and that the sea is a merciless witness to human error and cruel circumstances. May the memory of these people be not only a tribute, but also a lesson. To treat the lives of those in distress with care, to plan evacuations carefully, to cooperate internationally, and to strive to minimize the suffering of the innocent. The tragedy of 1945 makes us think about the price of conflict and how easily a major geopolitical storm can destroy individual human worlds. In the memory of historians and descendants, the MV Wilhelm Gustloff remains a symbol of destruction and, at the same time, a warning that must be heeded, so that fewer people find themselves in similar situations in the future, so that the memory of those who perished is transformed into actions that prevent the mistakes of the past from being repeated. The fates of those who embarked on that last voyage are intertwined in one great story of pain and loss, and it must remain part of the collective historical consciousness so that the human voice of conscience and responsibility does not allow us to forget those who did not return home. Over time, a wide range of research and commemorative initiatives have developed around this tragedy. Memoirs and testimonies from survivors allow us to understand the feelings that accompanied people in those final hours. Fear, confusion, hope for salvation, and the bitter realization of loss. Historians and documentary filmmakers have analyzed archives, attempted to reconstruct the chronology, and assessed what decisions could have changed the outcome. At the international level, issues of civilian protection during evacuations and rules of engagement in coastal areas, where innocent people often suffer, are being discussed. Commemorative events and exhibitions help to preserve memory and attract the attention of younger generations so that the lessons of the past are not lost. It is important that the tragedy of the MV Wilhelm Gustloff becomes not just a fact of loss, but also an incentive to strengthen rescue measures and international cooperation in similar emergencies. Society, states, and maritime services have a moral obligation to remember such events and turn pain into practical measures. Improving warning systems, expanding rescue capabilities, developing clear evacuation protocols, and training volunteers capable of acting in extreme conditions. This is a shared responsibility at all times. The night of 14 to April 15, 1912 was the moment when a world accustomed to confidence in technological progress was confronted with the harsh reality of natural forces. The legendary liner Titanic, conceived as the pinnacle of shipbuilding and a symbol of the indestructible power of human genius, set out on its first and last voyage, filled with passengers from different countries and with different destinies. The ship, said to be unsinkable, collided with an iceberg in the northern Atlantic Ocean, and this collision showed that even the most daring engineering solutions are vulnerable to the forces of nature and human limitations. The collision occurred at night, when the ice masses loomed out of the darkness like immovable giants, and the hole in the hull quickly filled the holds with water. Despite its impressive size and advanced technology, the ship was doomed due to a combination of factors: underestimation of the ice danger, excessive speed in conditions of limited visibility, and design features that did not allow for instant and complete sealing of compartments. It is worth dwelling on the ensuing hours of panic and human drama. The lifeboats, which were clearly insufficient, were filled first with first- and second-class passengers, while many third-class passengers, who found themselves in the labyrinth of corridors and cabins, did not manage to reach the deck in time. The lack of coordinated action, the confusion of languages, and the panic turned the evacuation into a series of tragic decisions and agonizing waits. People who were used to relying on engineers and officers suddenly found themselves having to find their own ways to safety and make life-or-death choices. Many boats were launched without a full complement of passengers, and some boats remained empty due to incorrect orders and misunderstandings. According to eyewitness accounts, the band on deck continued to play, perhaps to maintain calm, perhaps because people in that cruel moment clung to the slightest signs of order. The icy water and strong currents made survival in the ocean virtually impossible. A large number of people were exposed to the cold, and the bleak picture of night and debris complicated the search. 2.5 hours after the collision, the greatest ship of its time sank, leaving behind thousands of lives and many questions about whether things could have been done differently. Of the 2,224 people on board, only about 700 survived, and these dry statistics cannot convey the bitterness of loss and agonizing uncertainty experienced by the families and friends of those who perished. Moreover, the lack of lifeboats and non-compliance with international standards served as a shocking reminder that faith in technological progress is no substitute for simple safety measures. Subsequent investigations revealed a series of circumstances and human errors, from misjudging the ice threat to organizational miscalculations during the evacuation, from inadequate crew training to questions about the design of the ship itself. The public demanded answers, new rules and standards for maritime safety were created, and requirements for life-saving equipment, signaling, and evacuation procedures were tightened. The story of the Titanic became not only a tragedy of human destinies, but also a lesson that led to changes in international maritime law and practice. Memorials, books, and documentaries keep the memory of the victims alive and preserve the story of those events for future generations, so that nothing like this ever happens again. The cultural wave surrounding this story has turned the tragedy into a myth and a subject of artistic interpretation, but at the heart of all these narratives remains the real price of human self-confidence, and the transience of human life in the face of the elements. The memory of the Titanic makes us think about the fragility of technology and the fact that progress must be combined with respect for nature and the strict responsibility of those who manage complex systems and make decisions on which people's fates depend. This tragedy remains a reminder of the price of human self-confidence and the need to respect the forces of nature. This tragedy remains a reminder of the price of human self-confidence and the need to respect the forces of nature. This tragedy remains a reminder of the price of human self-confidence and the need to respect the forces of nature. This tragedy remains a reminder of the price of human self-confidence and the need to respect the forces of nature. This tragedy remains a reminder of the price of human hubris and the need to respect the forces of nature. This tragedy remains a reminder of the price of human hubris and the need to respect the forces of nature. This tragedy remains a reminder of the price of human hubris and the need to respect the forces of nature. This tragedy remains a reminder of the price of human hubris and the need to respect the forces of nature. This tragedy remains a reminder of the price of human hubris and the need to respect the forces of nature. This tragedy remains a reminder of the price of human hubris and the need to respect the forces of nature. This tragedy remains a reminder of the price of human overconfidence and the need to respect the forces of nature. This tragedy remains a reminder of the price of human overconfidence and the need to respect the forces of nature. On September 28, 1994, the Estonia ferry, traveling from Tallinn to Stockholm, encountered severe weather conditions in the Baltic Sea and soon found itself in a deadly trap of the elements. There were 989 people on board, but only 137 survived, and this appalling ratio of survivors to victims remains forever etched in the memories of those who lived through that night and those who lost loved ones. Events unfolded rapidly. Storm gusts and high waves made the ship vulnerable. The bow door, designed for loading and unloading, was subjected to incredible stress and eventually failed, allowing water to pour into the forward compartments and compromising the ship's buoyancy. The hull lost its longitudinal stability, and within minutes the ferry lost its normal draft and began to list rapidly. Inside the ship, corridors and compartments turned into a chaotic maze, doors and partitions hindered evacuation, and the cold wind and darkness of the night exacerbated the panic. People tried to get out onto the decks, but the crowds, cramped conditions and noise prevented coordinated action. Many lost each other and ran blindly, following voices or flashes of light. The lifeboats could not accommodate everyone. Some of them were launched incomplete due to haste, and the night conditions and icy water made rescue all the more difficult. Some died from injuries sustained in the collision, some were unable to get out of the interior, and many died of hypothermia before help arrived. A few hours later, international services organized a massive search operation, involving ships and helicopters from neighboring countries, but the cold and rough seas, compounded by the nighttime conditions, significantly reduced the chances of rescue, and the bodies of many were never found. The causes of the tragedy became the subject of lengthy investigations and disputes. The focus was on the design features of the ferry, the quality of the bow door's fastenings and protection, the suitability of the design solutions for the actual loads in heavy seas, as well as issues of technical maintenance and the adequacy of procedures in extreme situations. Various versions were put forward, from metal fatigue and design errors to possible maintenance violations and human factors. Some put forward more controversial hypotheses about a sudden internal explosion or external impact, but no evidence was found to support these radical theories, and most experts leaned towards a combination of factors, where each weakness exacerbated the other. The public response was enormous. Relatives of the victims demanded transparent investigations and fair compensation. Social movements and human rights organizations demanded reforms in the ferry transport control system, and international bodies discussed tightening standards and procedures. As a result, steps were taken to improve safety. Requirements for the design of ferry bows were revised. Stricter regulations were introduced for passenger accounting and the serviceability of life-saving equipment, and requirements for crew training and regular evacuation drills in difficult weather conditions were tightened. The moral aspect of the tragedy proved to be no less important. Survivors and relatives of the victims suffered not only loss, but also long-term trauma. Many survivors' testimonies describe a picture of horror: the screech of metal, screams, and then silence, cold that burned the body more than fire, and a feeling of helplessness. Memorials and commemorative events honor the memory of those who drowned that night, While eyewitness accounts and expert research serve as a constant reminder of the vulnerability of human technology to the forces of nature and the responsibility of those who operate transport. In the years that followed, historians, engineers, and human rights activists continued to study the Estonia tragedy, trying to identify lessons and translate them into concrete practices that could prevent a recurrence. Scientific investigations were organized, simulations of the hull's behavior under extreme wave loads were carried out, and safety procedures were thoroughly reviewed. However, no bureaucratic or legal procedure can bring back the lives that were lost, and many families are still searching for answers and justice. While society reminds itself that technical progress is powerless without strict compliance with standards, human control, and constant preparedness for emergencies. These lessons required constant monitoring of the condition of ships, strict passenger accounting and crew training, so that economic interests would never outweigh safety, and the memory of those who died became a catalyst for change. On May 7, 1915, the British liner RMS Lusitania, one of the fastest and most luxurious passenger ships of its time, was attacked by a German submarine off the coast of Ireland. The ship, which was considered a symbol of commercial and technological power, was torpedoed and sank in just 18 minutes. There were 1,959 passengers and crew members on board, but only 764 survived, and this tragedy shocked public opinion on both sides of the Atlantic. Lynch mob eulogies and official statements were replaced by accusations and diplomatic notes. The death of so many civilians became a powerful argument against thoughtless warfare and the cruelty of conflict. The events of that day showed how vulnerable non-military ships could be in a total naval confrontation and led to fierce debate about whether the Lusitania was carrying military cargo and ammunition, which could have intensified the explosion and hastened the ship's demise. There were disputes about the right to wage submarine warfare, the permissibility of attacks on passenger ships, and the moral responsibility of the parties. For the British government and its allies, the sinking of the Lusitania became a symbolic reason to intensify anti-German rhetoric, while in the American public, growing anti-German sentiment gave way to the idea that it was necessary to more actively oppose German actions at sea. Although the United States did not enter World War I until later, and for a variety of reasons, the Lusitania incident increased pressure on politicians and public opinion, pushing them to take decisive steps in support of the Allies. Investigations after the disaster examined the ship's design, route plans, speed, and precautions taken by the crew. Questions arose about the warnings given to passengers, the availability and accessibility of life-saving equipment, and whether the command was aware of the possible danger from submarines. Many eyewitnesses described moments of panic. The sound of the explosion, flying debris, screams and chaos on the decks, attempts to lower the lifeboats, and the restrained anxiety of those who still hoped for rescue. The waves and cold waters of the Atlantic claimed lives, and ships that came to the rescue picked up the exhausted and wounded, but the scale of the tragedy was already evident. The public reaction was powerful. Newspapers published shocking reports, political leaders demanded answers, and the families of the victims sought truth and compensation. The memory of the Lusitania became part of the cultural code of the era. Books, articles, works of art, and memorials preserve the story of those who found themselves in the water that spring. The tragedy served as a reminder that even in peacetime, war zones and naval control can turn ordinary passenger routes into deadly trajectories. In historical retrospect, the events surrounding the Lusitania are seen not only as an isolated disaster, but also as a turning point that revealed the cost of reckless strategies and human sacrifice in global conflict. Investigations and subsequent research in the 20th and 21st centuries continued to discuss the technical details and political context, attempting to separate facts from rumors and theories. Many scholars and researchers analyzed documents, memoirs, and naval reports to piece together as complete a picture as possible. What exactly happened that night? Why such a large ship sank so quickly? And what conclusions were drawn later? Public memory preserves the names of those who perished and those who were saved at the cost of incredible effort, reminding us that war affects not only the front lines but also the home front, bringing tragedy to the most unexpected places, including the luxurious decks of passenger liners. The incident resulted not only in human casualties, but also in a change in public consciousness, a revision of maritime law, and increased international control over maritime communications, as well as ongoing discussions about the ethics of warfare and the protection of civilians in times of general mobilization. In the years that followed, the disaster became the subject of numerous investigations, books, and artistic interpretations. Much of what has been said about the Lusitania remains controversial and debatable. Some emphasize the direct military responsibility and cruelty of submarine warfare, while others pointed to the complexity of naval tactics and the fact that the conflict changed the face of international law. Efforts to introduce a convoy system, which later proved crucial in protecting trade routes from submarine attacks, also played a significant role in changing naval strategy. The idealism and belief in technological progress typical of the time collided with a bitter reality. Shipping became an arena where humanitarian principles were often threatened. For the families of those who died, the consequences were long-lasting. Many fought for recognition of their losses, for compensation, and to ensure that the deaths of their loved ones were not reduced to statistics. The cultural memory of the event includes personal memoirs, official archives, works of art and documentary films, as well as scientific publications that attempt to reconstruct the course of events and understand the cause and effect relationships. Overall, the Lusitania tragedy became a lesson in how politics and war permeate people's daily lives and how important it is to remain vigilant and humane even in times of conflict. Researchers and public figures continue to return to the materials of that time, analyzing documents and statements to draw conclusions about what measures could have prevented such tragedies, and reminding us that history is not only informative but also educational, calling on future generations to consider the value of human life in any strategic decisions. The memory of those who perished demands honest and attentive treatment at all times. On January 13, 2012, the Italian cruise ship Costa Concordia, which seemed to be a symbol of luxury and safety, went down in history not as a triumph of engineers and the tourism industry, but as a grim reminder of how human error can destroy everything that has been built over the years. On that day, the liner, designed to carry 1,000 or more passengers, was approaching the island of Giglio, where people had gathered to see the majestic ship pass by and perhaps receive a greeting from its passengers. The captain, deciding to approach the shore to show the flotilla to the onlookers, made a maneuver that went beyond the limits of safe navigation. Passing too close to the rocks caused the hull of the liner to hit underwater rocks. A hole in the hull allowed water to enter, and the compartments began to flood rapidly. There were more than 4,200 people on board, including families with children, elderly tourists, and the crew responsible for their safety and comfort. In the first few minutes after the impact, people did not immediately realize the scale of the tragedy. Many thought that it would be limited to a minor accident or technical malfunction, but it soon became clear that the ship was beginning to list and lose buoyancy. Panic, mixed with surprise and disbelief, swept across the decks. The sounds of footsteps, screams, and crew commands merged into chaos. Although there were lifeboats on board, they were not able to accommodate everyone immediately, and it proved extremely difficult to organize an evacuation in conditions of increasing list and rough seas. The cause of the disaster was not just one maneuver. Investigations pointed to a combination of human irresponsibility, command errors, and insufficient training of personnel for extreme situations. The captain, who bore the main responsibility, found himself at the center of legal and moral claims. His decision to approach the shore for the sake of a so-called show was interpreted as neglecting safety for the sake of personal sensationalism. 32 people died in the disaster, and although the death toll is not comparable to the most massive maritime tragedies, each life lost was a heavy blow to families and society. The rescue operation that began that night lasted for many months. The ship's remains and debris had to be raised and disposed of, and the complex process of removing the sunken hull became one of the largest and most expensive rescue and cleanup operations in the history of civil shipbuilding. The fate of the liner, visible on the inviting shores of the island, became a daily reminder of what had happened. Tourists and locals looked at the tilted silhouette, reminding them that human pride and negligence can destroy even the most reliable structures. The public response was enormous. The press discussed not only the technical details and the actions of the rescuers, but also issues of responsibility, crew training, and the corporate culture of shipowners. International regulators and shipping organizations used this tragedy as an opportunity to tighten regulations and standards, demanding stricter procedures for controlling maneuvers near the coast, greater transparency in reporting passenger numbers, and mandatory evacuation drills. The testimonies of the survivors became a mirror of human drama. People spoke of fear, confusion, and, at the same time, the selfless bravery of those who risked their own lives to help others escape from the tilted decks and collapsed transparent corridors. Many recalled how, in the face of impending chaos, ordinary people became heroes, while professionals, from whom action was expected, showed weakness or poor leadership. The problem of lengthy bureaucratic red tape and legal disputes became another consequence of the disaster. Attempts to establish the exact chain of events, hold those responsible to account, and organize compensation for the victims dragged on for years and were accompanied by a series of scandals. This incident showed that technological progress and luxury cannot justify neglecting basic safety rules, and that human life must take precedence over the desire for spectacular gestures and demonstrations of status. Today, the story of the Costa Concordia remains in safety textbooks and crew training materials, and photographs of the ship lying on its side off the coast have become images that remind us of the price of management errors and lack of control. The memory of those who died and were injured is perpetuated by commemorative events and documentaries that explore the details of the incident and ask what changes have taken place since the tragedy. Despite the passage of time, the lessons of the Costa Concordia continue to serve as a warning. Human error, aggression towards risk, and the desire to impress can have devastating consequences, and no technical perfection can save from tragedy if it is not accompanied by a culture of responsibility and a willingness to follow rules that protect human life. The efforts to raise and dispose of the liner were a technically complex and costly operation, requiring the involvement of specialized platforms, tugs, and international teams. The work took years and was accompanied by environmental measures to prevent fuel leaks. The trials led to the conviction of the captain and widespread discussions about corporate responsibility, and the reforms introduced after the tragedy affected navigation procedures, mandatory passenger registration, and regular crew training. Survivors and relatives of the victims faced a long struggle for compensation and justice. The psychological consequences of the tragedy lingered for a long time, and the image of the liner off the coast became a symbol of warning. No technical perfection can replace a culture of safety and responsible management, and the memory of the victims remains in our hearts. The sea knows no mercy. Each of these disasters is a reminder that even the greatest ships and the most confident captains are powerless in the face of error and the elements. The water preserves the memory of everything it has swallowed.